The paper hit the floor before Adiz even had a chance to breathe. It slid from Madame Ngozie's thick fingers like it was something shameful, something that deserved to be discarded, and landed face down on the cracked concrete of the Academy of the Seven Rivers courtyard. Every student in that compound heard it. Every eye turned. And Madame Ngozi, headmistress and untouchable authority of the school that sat beneath the great silk cotton tree of Akafir village, planted her hands on her hips and smiled the smile of a woman who had never once in her life lost. "Pick it up," she said, loud enough for the entire courtyard to hear. "Pick it up, Adiz, and tell me, does a girl who cannot afford her own school sandals have any business competing with students of breeding?" Adiz did not flinch. That was the thing about her that Madame Ngozi had never understood, not in 3 long years of trying. She bent slowly, with the kind of grace that comes not from wealth but from dignity, and she picked up her exam paper from the ground. She did not look at it yet. She looked at Madame Ngozi instead, her dark eyes steady and unafraid, and she said nothing at all. That silence carried more weight than any words could have. And somewhere behind the gathered crowd of students, a boy named Kofi watched with his arms folded and his jaw tight, and he felt something shift inside his chest, something that had no name yet, but was already growing. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome, and if you are watching from across the villages, across the rivers, across the great seas beyond, drop your location in the comments right now because I want to know where my family is gathered today. Are you doing well? Are you settled in? Good. Because this story, Met Her Match, is about to make your heart race in ways you are not ready for. If you have not yet joined this family by subscribing, please do so now. The button is right there. One tap. You will not regret it. Now, let us go back to Adiz. Adiz had always been the kind of girl that the village of Akafir did not quite know what to do with. She was not rich. Her mother, Chidinma, woke before the sun to sell smoked fish at the market near the second river, and the coins she brought home were counted carefully and stretched impossibly thin. Adiz's school uniform had been washed so many times the blue had faded to the color of a cloudy sky, and her sandals, the ones Madame Ngozi had sneered about, were held together with a strip of cloth her mother had torn from an old headwrap. But Adiz's mind, that was another thing entirely. From the time she could hold a stick and scratch letters in the red earth outside their mud brick home, she had been hungry for knowledge the way other children were hungry for palm nut soup. She read every book she could find, borrowed, traded for, or begged. She asked questions that made the younger teachers uncomfortable and the older ones secretly pleased. Numbers arranged themselves in her head like constellations, and words, in the village tongue, in the colonial language, in the old storyteller's dialect, moved through her like music. Her best friend, Amara, always said Adiz had been born in the wrong body. "You should have been born with a rich father and a big compound," Amara would say, laughing as they walked home together along the river path. "Then no one would dare question you." "I do not need a rich father," Adiz would answer. "I need only what I already have." "And what is that?" "Time and a pencil." Amara would always laugh, but lately the laughter had a worried edge to it, because Madame Ngozi had noticed Adiz. And in the Academy of the Seven Rivers, being noticed by Madame Ngozi was never a good thing. The headmistress had ruled the school for 19 years with a hand that bent like iron and a tongue that could strip bark from a tree. She came from a family of chiefs, wore gold earrings every single day, and had never, not once in all her years of teaching, passed a scholarship recommendation to a student who came from a poor home. "Excellence," she always declared at assembly, "belongs to those who are prepared for it." And by prepared, everyone in Akafir understood she meant moneyed, connected, worthy by birth. Then came the announcement. The Great River Scholarship. Full funding for 3 years of advanced study at the institute beyond the mountains. 1 seat. Open to any student from any of the 7 villages. Decided entirely by a single examination, written, sealed, marked by examiners who had never heard the names of any family in Akafir. Adiz read the notice pinned to the great silk cotton tree and felt something electric move through her bones. This was it. This was the door she had been walking toward her whole life without knowing its shape. She went home and told her mother. Chidinma set down her wooden spoon, looked at her daughter for a long moment, and then quietly began to cry not from sorrow, but from the particular ache of hope that has lived too long in a careful place. "Study," her mother whispered. "Just study, my child." Adiz studied. She studied until the oil in their lamp was gone, and she used moonlight through the window. She studied on the river path, on market mornings, in the minutes before dawn when the village was still, and thinking had no competition. She was not the only one who had entered. 12 students sat the examination the morning it was held, in the dusty examination room behind the headmistress's office. But she was the only one who left that room feeling, for the first time in her life, completely certain. She had answered every question, all of them, including the bonus problem at the end that she had overheard 2 of the older boys saying they would simply leave blank. She did not tell anyone. She went home, ate her mother's soup, and slept the sleep of someone who has given everything they have. The results were due on a Tuesday, which in Akafir was market day, which meant the courtyard of the academy would be full when Madame Ngozi chose to read them. And Madame Ngozi always chose to read results publicly. It was, she said, to celebrate achievement. Everyone who had ever attended the Academy of the 7 Rivers knew it was really to control the story. It was also on that Tuesday morning, in the scramble of students gathering near the silk cotton tree, that Adiz collided quite literally with Kofi. He was new, not to Akafir. His family had lived near the 5th River for generations, but to the academy, having transferred only 2 months before from a school in the next district. He was tall and quiet in the way of people who observe more than they speak, with close-cut hair and eyes that held a careful, thoughtful light. He caught her before she fell, her books scattering, and he gathered them from the ground with a speed and care that surprised her. "You dropped your algebra," he said, handing it back. "Thank you," she said, slightly breathless, though whether from the near fall or from the way he looked at her when he said it, she could not immediately determine. "You are Adiz," he said. It was not a question. "You know me." "Everyone knows you," he said simply. "You are the one who left the examination room smiling." She stared at him. He handed her the last book and walked away, and she stood there in the morning light feeling inexplicably unsettled in the most pleasant possible way. It was not the moment for such feelings. She knew that, but feelings, like examination results, do not wait for convenient timing. "Drop a comment right now. Are you Team Adiz already? Let me hear from you. And if someone led you here, tell them thank you. This family is built on sharing good things." The results came out just before noon. Madame Ngozi stood at the center of the courtyard with the sealed envelope from the examining board, and she made a long show of opening it, adjusting her gold earrings, smoothing her fine wrapper, ensuring that everyone within the compound walls was watching before she drew out the single sheet of paper inside. She read it, and something happened to her face. It was subtle, the kind of shift that only those watching very closely would catch. A tightening around the eyes, a slight compression of the lips, gone in under 2 seconds, replaced by the broad, practiced smile of authority. But Amara, standing beside Adiz, grabbed her friend's arm. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Adiz had seen it. "Students of the academy," Madame Ngozi began, her voice rolling out across the courtyard like a drumbeat. "The Great River Scholarship examination results have arrived. The examining board has made their decision. And I must inform you," she paused, long, theatrical, "that the student who achieved the highest score in this district's history has been identified." Murmurs, a rustle of excitement. Adiz felt her heart press hard against her ribs. 100%, Madame Ngozi said. "A perfect score, the first in 7 villages in 11 years. Another pause. "However," and there it was, that word, dropped like a stone into still water. "However, the scholarship committee requires that any nominated student present evidence of their academic standing from this institution, countersigned by the school's head. I will be reviewing all submissions personally before forwarding any recommendation." The murmurs changed. Those who knew Madame Ngozi understood exactly what had just happened. She had not announced the name. She had simply announced, to everyone paying attention, that she intended to stand between the result and the world. Adiz did not panic. She asked, after the gathering dispersed, to speak with Madame Ngozi privately. The head mistress received her in her office, seated behind a carved desk that had belonged to her grandfather, and she looked at Adiz the way a hawk looks at something small and still in the grass. "You scored perfectly," Madame Ngozi said, as though it tasted sour. "That is unexpected." "I worked very hard, Ma." "Hard work," said Madame Ngozi, "does not compensate for background. The Institute is not a place for every kind of student. There are expectations, social expectations. Students who attend come from families that understand certain things." She folded her hands on the desk. "I will submit my recommendation for the scholarship within the week. I simply want you to understand that my recommendation considers many factors." It was a threat wrapped in the language of administration. Adiz understood every word of it. She walked out of that office and stood for a moment beneath the silk cotton tree, and for the first time since the morning she had read the scholarship notice, she felt afraid. Because it occurred to her that a perfect score might not be enough, that the door she had been walking toward her whole life might still be locked by someone who held the key not because she deserved it, but simply because she had always held it. Kofi found her there. He said nothing for a while, just stood beside her, looking at the river path that curved away between the trees. "She is not going to recommend you," he said finally. "I do not know that yet." "I do." He turned to look at her. "My cousin attended this school 4 years ago. She also scored highest in her year. Madame Ngozi told the scholarship board her cousin had emotional instability and could not handle the pressure of the institute. My cousin comes from a fisherman's family." He paused. "She now sweeps the market near the third river." Adiz felt something cold move through her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," he said simply, "you need to know what you are actually dealing with. And because I think you are the kind of person who can deal with it, if you know the truth." She looked at him then, really looked, and there was something in his eyes that was not pity and not admiration, but something more honest than either, a recognition. As if he saw her not as a poor girl who had scored well, but simply as herself. Capable, whole, worth fighting for. It was the most frightening and wonderful thing anyone had ever communicated to her, without using a single unnecessary word. She went home and told her mother what Madame Ngozi had said. Chidinma listened in silence. Then she said, "There is a man, old Ezra, the retired record keeper. He kept all the Academy's examination records for 20 years before Madame Ngozi arrived. He still has copies of everything." She looked at her daughter. "Go and speak with him." Old Ezra lived at the edge of Akafir, where the village gave way to mango groves, in a small house packed floor to ceiling with folded papers and bound ledgers. He listened to Adiz's story, his old eyes moving behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and then he went to a shelf and began pulling out bound books without speaking. He laid them open on his wooden table. His finger moved down columns of names and numbers, years and scores. 7 students, he said finally. In 19 years, all from poor families, all scored in the top range, all denied recommendation by Madame Ngozi. He looked up. And every single one of them, the recommendation was given instead to a student whose family had donated to the school's building fund within the previous year. He closed the ledger. "I have been waiting for someone to come and look at this. I did not think it would take so long." He let Adiz copy the records. She and Kofi sat at his table for 3 hours, organizing everything into a clear letter addressed to the regional school board, the body above Madame Ngozi, the one with the authority to override her. Kofi wrote in a clean, confident hand and did not once ask for credit. He simply worked beside her, shoulder to shoulder, in the warm amber light of old Ezra's lamp. At one point, Adiz looked up and found him looking at her, and neither of them said anything. And the silence between them was full of things that would need to be addressed at a later time, a better time, a time that was not this urgent and terrifying. But it was a silence that both of them noted and neither of them forgot. If you are still here with us, I love you for it. Drop a heart in the comments. We are getting to the part that will make you sit forward in your seat. The letter arrived at the regional school board 3 days before Madame Ngozi's deadline to submit her recommendation. The board acted with a speed that surprised everyone in Akafir, perhaps because the evidence was too clean, too documented, too irrefutable to ignore. Or perhaps because one of the examiners had a daughter who had once applied to the institute and been denied on mysterious grounds. Whatever the reason, 2 officials arrived at the Academy of the Seven Rivers on a Thursday morning and asked to speak with the headmistress privately. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When Madame Ngozi emerged, she looked like a woman who had walked into a thunderstorm without an umbrella and was trying very hard to pretend it was not raining. She went directly to her office. She did not stop at the courtyard. She did not look at any of the students gathered near the silk cotton tree. Adiz learned what had happened from Amara, who had learned it from the school cook, who had a gift for gathering information the way other people gathered firewood. The board had reviewed the records. They had found the pattern. They had informed Madame Ngozi that the scholarship recommendation for the student with the highest examination score, Adiz, daughter of Chidinma, from the house near the second river, would be submitted by the board directly, bypassing the headmistress entirely. Madame Ngozi was permitted to remain in her position, but the board would be conducting a full review of the past decade's scholarship recommendations. She would be watched. Her power over outcomes like this one was, effectively, finished. Adiz stood in the courtyard when she heard this and felt something she had not expected, not triumph, exactly. Something quieter. The way the air feels after a long rain, when the earth has drunk its fill and everything smells of relief and beginning. Madame Ngozi came to her the next morning. Adiz was sitting beneath the silk cotton tree with her algebra book, still studying, because she was who she was, and old habits of excellence do not dissolve in victory. The headmistress stood before her for a moment, and then sat down beside her on the roots of the great tree, which was perhaps the most surprising thing Adiz had witnessed in 3 years of watching the woman. She said nothing for a long time. Then, "You scored perfectly." "Yes, Ma. I have been in this school a long time." Her voice was different now, not stripped of power exactly, but stripped of performance. "I told myself it was about standards, about making sure only the right students represented this school." She paused. "I believe I confused right with familiar." It was not a full apology. Adiz was not sure it needed to be. She looked at this woman who had been her obstacle, her adversary, the source of so many sleepless nights, and she saw, beneath all of it, someone who had learned the rules of a world that rewarded cruelty and had played by those rules so long she had mistaken them for truth. "My mother used to say," Adiz said, "that a person can put a lid on the sun every morning and still not stop it from rising." She closed her book. "I was going to rise, Ma, one way or another." Madame Ngozi looked at her. For the first time in their entire history together, something moved behind the headmistress's eyes that was not calculation or contempt. It might have been, if one was willing to be generous, the first faint beginnings of respect. The scholarship letter arrived on a Saturday, while Chidinma was at the market. Adiz ran to find her, ran the whole length of the second river path, past the fishermen and the women with their headloads, and the goats that never moved for anyone. And when she found her mother at her fish stall, she pressed the opened envelope into her hands without a single word. Chidinma read it, and then she sat down right there in the market, on the ground beside her wooden table, and she cried with her whole body the way she had not cried since the day Adiz's father had died and left them alone in the world. She cried and she laughed at the same time, the way joy sometimes comes, fierce and overwhelming, too big to hold with just one expression. Adiz knelt on the market ground with her, not caring about her faded uniform or who was watching, and she held her mother's hands, and they stayed there for a while in the dust and the market noise and the smell of fish and wood smoke, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever experienced. Kofi came to find her that evening at the river path, which she had not asked him to do, and which did not surprise her at all. He stood at the bend where the water caught the last of the sunset light, and when she appeared on the path he straightened and looked at her with those careful, honest eyes. "I heard," he said. "The whole village has heard by now," she said, smiling. "Are you ready?" he asked. "For the institute, for the mountains, for all of it." She thought about it, truly thought about it, standing at the river's edge with the water moving past her feet and the evening birds beginning their noise, and the particular golden quality of the light that comes at day's end in Akafir, which she had loved her whole life and would miss, she realized, with the keen ache of someone who now had somewhere else to go. "I have been ready," she said, "since before I knew what I was ready for." Kofi looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, as if the words were something he had been carrying a long time and had finally decided to set down in the right place. "I would very much like, when you return from the Institute in 3 years, to find out who you become." He paused. "If that is something you would also want." She held his gaze. The river moved. The birds called. The last light turned everything amber and gold. "I think," she said, "that it is very much something I would want." He smiled then, not the small, careful smile of someone who does not dare want things, but the full, open smile of someone who has decided to. And it changed his whole face, that smile, in a way that she already knew she would think about on the long nights ahead when the mountains were cold, and the work was hard, and she needed to remember why she had fought for this. She would think about her mother, crying in the market dust. She would think about old Ezra and his ledgers full of names the world had tried to forget. She would think about Amara, who would wave her off from the village road and immediately begin writing letters. She would think about the silk cotton tree and the river path and the smell of smoked fish in the morning. And she would think about Kofi, standing at the river's edge in the golden hour, deciding to say the thing he meant. She left Akafir on a Wednesday, with 1 trunk, 3 books, and the certainty of someone who has learned, through no easy path, that belonging has nothing to do with what you were born with, that excellence cannot be owned by those who simply decide it belongs to them, that every door that was ever locked against her had, in the end, only taught her how to walk through walls. Madame Ngozi stood at the school gate when the village gathered to say farewell. She did not speak, but she was there. And when Adiz passed her, the headmistress gave a single, stiff nod, the nod of a woman who has been humbled and knows it and is learning, slowly, what to do with that knowledge. Adiz nodded back, then she kept walking. She did not look back at the gate. She looked forward, toward the road that curved beyond the mango groves and led to the mountains, toward the life that had always been hers, waiting, patient and certain, on the other side of everything that had tried to stop her. And the village of Akafir, in all its dust and noise and river light and stories, watched her go proud and a little breathless. The way a place feels when it has produced someone it knows is going to be extraordinary. Thank you so much for staying until the end of this story. If Adiz's journey moved you, if any part of this made you feel something, please leave a comment below and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the courtyard? The market? The river at sunset? I read every single one. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, this is your sign. Click that button and become part of this family. Every story we tell here is for you. See you in the next one.